Welcome to the Leadership Passport, the podcast where we dive into the journeys, challenges, and insights of school and education leaders from around the world. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Mr. Ewan McIntosh. Ewan is the Managing Director of NoTosh, that's based in Edinburgh, with offices in Melbourne. Ewan's life path involved narrow misses with investment banks and the British Army before he discovered his love of learning and teaching could be a dream job. His mission today is to ensure that every learner gets to experience great teaching and learning in rich learning environments. Ewan is a Life Fellow of the RSA for his contributions to education and digital media and a member of the Royal Company of Merchants, Edinburgh. He taught modern languages, was Scotland's National Advisor on the Future of Learning and Commissioner at Channel 4 Television. Welcome, Ewan.
Thank you so much. A very, very long introduction. I should have sent a shorter one knowing it was going to be read out. But yeah, thank you for the lovely introduction.
No, it's great to have you here. So a really uncomfortable question to start with, I know. If your leadership style were a song or a movie, what would it be and why?
I think I told you before we got started, I hate these kind of questions. They always get me into trouble. And I never know what to say that will be pithy. You know, the film Reservoir Dogs is one that I keep going back to. Now, it's not because of the viciousness or anything like that. It's more the different colours, the different names of the different protagonists in it. And I think that leadership is sometimes like that, that you have to adopt a different persona depending on who's in front of you and how they're going to best work with what particular style you've got underway. So I'm not aware of having a particular leadership style other than one that's listening first, observing first, and then choosing how to react on the basis of that.
Yeah, amazing. So you're talking about your leadership style there. So I'm interested to delve in a little bit about your leadership journey. So I'm interested in what inspired you to become an international leader or education leader in this sector.
It's funny because I was a classroom teacher, so I taught French and German in state schools in Scotland. I taught in universities as well for a couple of years, but I was good at working with particularly challenging groups of young people, particularly with the use of technology. And they do this thing where they take you out of the classroom because you're good at doing something in the classroom. They say, "Oh, that's great. Now come and sit behind a desk and use Outlook." That's how long ago it was. And try and scale this innovation, scale these ideas to more people around the country. And so that was my inadvertent kind of jump into educational leadership, because it was, first of all, leading modern languages development work are all around Scotland, and then looking at how the similar strategies that had been super successful. We had about 3,500 teachers in Scotland who were involved in language learning and teaching in primary school and secondary school, sharing what they were doing almost every week through a digital platform we had created. And this is pre-Twitter, kind of at the same time YouTube was being launched. So it was really pretty innovative for the time. And then they said, can you do that for all the school subjects and all the ages and stages? And so I said, well, maybe not nationally, but certainly back in my own local authority of East Lothian Council. And we did. We had a phenomenal project that year that got maybe from 20 or so educators sharing what they were doing each and every week, up to close to 8,000 blogs for different classes, different groups, with almost 1,200 staff engaged in sharing week in, week out. And so that's what I mean by inadvertent. I didn't really mean to end up in a leadership role. Primarily, I saw myself the opposite way, supporting people from underneath and giving them the tools they needed to do great work. And I think that's what I've taken in. When I was at Channel 4, it was the same as a commissioner. Although I was leading project ideas and helping shape ideas, ultimately I saw myself as supporting them with cash, expertise, partnerships, so that their ideas could flourish and meet with greater audiences. So I guess that's how I got into leading. But for me, it's very much leading from behind, perhaps leading from below, so that people can flourish.
Yeah, fantastic. So you talked a little bit about how you became a leader, or how you fell into it, or almost. You think back, is there a defining moment along the way that sort of led to maybe not a pivot point, but something that really stands out to you along the way in your leadership journey?
Don't know if I believe in those big moments. I think that life is about lots of small things adding up. And so lots of those small moments adding up, and people who are very generous in the way, giving me opportunities to lead small projects that became bigger projects, and then grouping up those bigger projects until they became, you know, £50 million projects that needed a lot of work. So there's lots of small moments in the way. I think there was one point which was a low point, and I've had a few of those in the way. They're often the ones where you get the biggest learning. But when I was at Channel 4, I always remember having to pitch ideas that I had found from people in Scotland and Northern Ireland and the north of England, and I would take them down to London on a Tuesday morning and have to convince all the other commissioners around the table that this was worth investing in. These were ideas worth paying attention to. And for months, I just couldn't get one over the line, and it was so disheartening. I just kind of went down to London, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take that flight down, and knowing that you were going to lose that day, it was horrible. And then I went away, got hold of a book, James Borg's Persuasion, which is a masterpiece in how to persuade people, and kind of devoured it over the weekend, took the strategies into work the following Tuesday, and got every one of my projects agreed. And it was like the floodgates opening. It's like, oh, okay, so I have agency, I can do things, but you've got to learn how, you've got to know how. And I think that from that point, for the last kind of 16 years or so, 17 years, it has been taking ideas like that, taking techniques like that, and then turning them to schools and helping thousands of educational leaders understand that there are ways of doing things that tend to work. And if you know those ways of doing things, then you can inspire people in your community to go the extra mile. You can create space for them to absolutely flourish and see their ideas come into reality, rather than leading from the top down, which is the way traditional strategic planning has tended to work. Inspiring hundreds of schools to operate in a more agile way, where ideas flourish from below and feed the system, rather than the system pushing people to do what they're told.
Yeah, and it's funny you should talk about just those little, things you learnt in that book, but those tools or tips or strategies or approaches that can make a big difference. And I remember just recently, NoTosh, one of your newsletters, put out about decision making. Is it, when you're in your teams, is it a hat, a haircut, or a tattoo?
That's
Um,
right. That's a
I
James
wonder.
Clear thing, which I just loved, and it was interesting. I put that post out with a graphic that I'd produced using a well-known AI tool, and it was funny. People say, "I've read the book, I've read the blog posts from James Clear, I've done these things," but that illustration is the thing that sticks in their mind, because it's a kind of simple way and a funny way to remember. And I think that those kinds of techniques, I mean, there's six and a half a dozen. There'll be another 100 ideas like that come along, another 200 frameworks that come. And that's why I'm very cynical about the consultancy that comes along saying, yeah, we've got frameworks and we're going to show you these frameworks and it's going to solve all your problems. Because you can also just go to Amazon and order a book or two or three and have the same frameworks. What matters, I think, is you've got to be able to internalize them, make them your own, and make them your habit and make them your routine. And then those tools and frameworks do become part of who you are. They become part of the way you're thinking, as long as you practice them and use them day in, day out, rather than just a kind of one hit wonder.
Yeah. And there can be some really interesting differences in how those are interpreted or how they can connect across different cultures. If you work within or across multicultural teams, and I wonder if you've had any sort of aha moments working across teams with, there could be just little things, particularly across cultures that have particularly connected with you over the years.
It's a hard one, because when you're working, I think some of the biggest aha moments are sometimes where things don't pan out the way you expected. I've only had, I think in 15 years, I've had 7 bad days in the job, genuinely bad days where things just weren't going to work out. Each time, it's often come down to the same thing, which is at the very, very beginning of a project, a change project, people are not clear on what they want. And so they fudge it. They have this weird edubabble that they use. They refer to their mission and their vision, their strategy with great confidence. And at the time, I've maybe not pushed hard enough to say, I'm really sorry, but that's not clear. or it's not particularly differentiated, or, is that it? Is that really what your vision is? Or testing, you say that's your vision, but your strategy doesn't really show me how you're trying to realize it. And here you are asking us to look at renovating or building your $20 million, $30 million, $40 million campus. There's so many questions that sometimes we should ask at the beginning. I think in education, in international schools in particular, there is perhaps a reluctance to see the value in asking those questions early on. So people sometimes say, "Oh, give us a proposal for strategy," and what they want is a PDF that gives them all the answers and gives them certainty. When actually what they need and the greatest value is offered when they've got someone like us asking those questions, hard questions, and then helping them answer them. And from that, you suddenly see clarity and you can understand, right, this is probably where you're headed as a school. Now let's go and speak to your community and find out whether they agree. But the reality is people want to have 2 or 3 hours of Zoom calls with their board members and the other leadership team members to interview you to see whether you're going to be good enough to create their strategic plan. And that's where you're asking those questions, and it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. And it's not particularly useful for a board or leadership team to be put in the hop on those questions, because that's the work. So I'd say the biggest aha moment is that the greatest value that can be offered when you're thinking about the direction of your department or your school or your division is often having that outside person asking awkward questions about really testing the assumptions behind what you said you were doing and what you're actually doing.
And you're right, that can be really uncomfortable for whether it's heads of school or CEO or boards of schools to face those, because quite often they haven't had those questions asked by someone with an outside perspective before. And
it could be hard hard as well for a head of department to have that. I think when you're doing kind of accreditation type work, you might have a self-study. And the advantage of a self-study is that it gives you questions that you can ask in the privacy of your own departmental meeting, and you can have that uncomfortable moment together, which is not uncomfortable. It leads to brilliant debate and discussion. And one of the things that we do is we have a great kind of internal checklist for heads of department, or even just aspirant leaders, people who pick up the baton on a project and run with it. They're often doing literacy work or technology work in schools, but they don't have a job title that goes with it. Those people need that outside perspective, but they may not think to go seeking it through a coach, or they may not be part of that big kind of strategic planning process. So these kinds of provocative questions, how well are you doing this and how do you know? They're super important to get hold of from whichever source you can. And then every departmental meeting you have, every team meeting you have, save 10 minutes just to tackle one of those questions as a team. I feel awkward a little bit for 10 minutes and then you can go home. When you do that every week, they become less awkward, and you start to build a shared idea of what really matters and what doesn't. And you start to kill off the work that is busy work, that's not contributing to what you really care about.
And I'm glad to hear you talk about sort of the realities and the on the ground work of leadership. And I'm wondering what might be one of the toughest leadership challenges you might have faced, and how did you kind of navigate it?
I think the implementation gap is what I would call the biggest leadership challenge anyone faces at the moment. Creating strategy, writing some words on a sheet of paper is not easy, but it's relatively easy compared to making those ideas happen in practice. And the implementation gap is the gap between those big ideas and the reality of it's 11 o'clock on a Thursday, and I've got this class to teach. I'm a middle leader who has maybe 2 discretionary hours a week or 6 discretionary hours a week, but that's still not enough to even get the admin done of my day-to-day work. And here you are now giving this big, brassy strategy for the whole school, investing millions in facilities over here and on technology over there. What does that mean to me? I don't even have time to think about it. So there's that gap is the biggest leadership challenge of any organization, not just schools, but beyond schools in the world of business. It's replicated. Overcoming that, I think, means that we've got to invest far more in some very, I would call them basic leadership skills, but there's nothing basic about them. They're kind of learnable skills that transform people from being managers and paper pushers and administrative people into genuine leaders. And you can't just have that at the top of an organization. You need it across the whole board. So you need it in particularly grade level leaders and heads of department. And schools, when you look at this, the paychecks that go to these people, they get very little discretionary extra cash to manage that group of people. So if you're going to empower them properly, you need to give them the training, the support that they need to operate as effectively and efficiently as possible and save a bit of time on the boring stuff. But you also need to give them the skills to understand how their work can align with whatever direction the school is setting in, and the confidence to kill off work that doesn't align to that and have those kinds of serious conversations, not waiting to be told, but rather pitching the next big idea to the bosses. And it's tough because it takes time. We run a leadership program called Leading from the Middle, and it's 3 months long, over 3 sprints. It demands not that people write an essay or show up to the training to get a certificate, which is what everyone else seems to be offering. To get the little LinkedIn badge, a bunch of pixels on your LinkedIn profile, you actually have to make a change happen in your school and prove it either worked or failed, but you've got to have some evidence of impact that you've tried to create and what the reality was. And you know what? The transformation of people in that is quite phenomenal, because it's not about showing up to the course. It's about taking one idea a day and using it that day to make a change happen. And when you look at that, it's like cumulative interest in the bank. They just grow into quite different people. That's what we need, not weekends away learning how to manage a meeting. We need people who can understand how to develop great ideas in collaboration with the people who might normally say no to those ideas, how to use creative conflict to develop better programs for your students, not to shy away from arguments, not to shy away from difficult conversations or try and get out of them or negotiate your way, but rather to embrace that as a creative conflict and see what you can develop. And then also how to manage people in a way that empowers them to go and do their best work and gives them a break when they're under the pump and unable to ship the goods that particular month, because it's that month where everything else is happening. How to make projects happen over 9 weeks instead of 9 months of a school year. All of that is learnable, but very few people are actually out there teaching it and showing people how to do. So that's one of the missions that we're on, to try and improve that and just close that implementation gap a little bit further.
Yeah, well, I would back you up 100% on that, because I think I'm thinking back 2 years ago now. We had a group of our middle leaders enroll in that course here from Kuwait, and you're right, the change was phenomenal at the end of that couple of months, and they came back and they weren't different people, but they were, you could notice a significant change in the questions they were asking, the types of things that they were doing, even just their level of energy around the place, and almost a reinvigoration
Yeah.
for their role. And,
And
that
I
was a
can
big
only
learning curve for me, that we'd had all this untapped kind of resource that we weren't
that's
fully
it.
supporting.
I often find myself apologising to school leaders because quite often as well, they get really good and get promoted out to another school.
And that's
Mea
exactly what
culpa.
happened.
So I think that it's interesting. That's a really interesting question for international schools, who I think often call themselves, being part of a great community of international schools. It's a kind of trope, isn't it? But the reality is, are we happy to invest in middle leaders unilaterally, knowing that if they're any good, and if we've not got opportunities for their growth within our school, then we should support them to go to somewhere else, in the knowledge that we get the payoff when other good people come to us. And I think that that's pushing the limits of our community really to stress point, because I'm not sure every school invests equally in developing its middle leaders. But it is, as you say, it's that untapped talent. And it's really expensive if you're not tapping into it. It's a huge chunk of cash on your payroll that's not being used to direct your school towards a particular direction. And you can add an extra marketing communications person if you like, but the real difference is when mums and dads are talking to each other and talking to their kids, and they're talking about the experience they have at school. That's the thing that sells your school. So if your experience at school is not something that matches the words on the website, then you have a big problem. So how do you make sure that the experience exceeds what's on the website? I am convinced it comes down to those middle leaders, and also some really clear, simple direction from on top of, this is our North Star, this is where we're headed.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've established you're doing some really great things. What about one mistake that might have shaped your leadership approach? Anything that stands out?
There's a lot of mistakes, and I get quite good at hiding them. I was a percussionist. I still am a percussionist, but one of the things you learn when you're playing the orchestral cymbals, for example, is if you make a mistake, the only person who knows you've made a mistake sometimes is you. If your face gives away you've made a mistake, then suddenly 2,000 people in the audience also know you made a mistake. So you don't have to kind of do the mea culpa on mistakes. You can treat them as learning moments. I think the biggest mistake I've referred to already really is a repeated mistake that I should probably not be making anymore. It's not asking enough questions at the start of projects to get clarity. And I think that's a mistake that I've got better and better at not making, but it still happens. It still happens. And then I think the other one is, I think lately the biggest mistake as well is a little bit introspective maybe, but it's sometimes not having confidence that what we are doing as a team is having value all the time. So it's lovely when people tell you that, but sometimes you just have that sneaking doubt of, are we making a concrete contribution? And how do we know? And so the mistake is always not taking a pre-measure of where a school or a community is before we get started with them. We do it, but we're often reliant on the data that they've got, which might not be that great. And then you do this project, and you've got to be able to then gauge, did the project make a difference within the time we were working with them, as well as in the 6 months and 6 years after that. And I think the biggest mistake for many years was not taking that pre kind of measurement of how do you feel about where your school is today versus what it feels like at the end. And so that feedback loop, that data cycle is something that over the past year or so, it's taken 14, 15 years to get to the point of saying we really need to make this algorithmic, and part of what we do every day is logged in. And so that's the biggest mistake I've made, because it also leads to personal stress, self-doubt, all the problems that then stop you doing your best work in the end, which is daft. To not take action on it when you know that that's the root cause of the problem is daft. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake that we've started to resolve a little bit. It does make me think about the value schools think they add to students, and we work with a lot of schools, and over the years I've seen plenty of schools claim incredible examination successes, but when you survey families on how many of them are tutoring and paying for tutoring over and above, sometimes you can have as much as 70% of students being tutored on math, and yet your math department might be the toughest one to bring around to this more engaging, expeditionary way of learning, for example, because what we do works. Well, no, what you're doing is not working. What's working is the tutoring kids are having on the other side. So if the tutoring is going to continue anyway, let's make the maths more engaging in school. That's because no one's gathering the baseline data. So can we gather more baseline data on what the experience of school is actually like, please? And then can we do interventions to see whether what we're doing is actually improving the experience of kids or not?
Yeah, amazing. So if we cast our minds sort of forward to the future of education and school leadership, how do you see international educational school leadership evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that leadership in international schools needs to up its game in terms of professionalisation. I think it's remarkable that international schools have achieved what they have done, given the relative lack of formal leadership structures and expectations for senior leaders in schools. The senior leadership is taught in a peer-to-peer manner quite often. So you're learning from someone who's done it without any questions to whether what they do is effective or not, and very few measures to gauge whether it's effective or not. Accreditation doesn't show you that. I would challenge anyone who says it does. I don't think any accreditation is up to that mark yet. And then you don't have structures that state systems often do. So I'd look at Australia, any of the states in Australia, and I would look at what goes on in Scotland, in England. there, to become a head teacher, it's a pretty rigorous program of learning and development before you can even look at a job advert. And in international schools, that's not the case. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, I think there's a huge opportunity there for people like us and firms like us, but also for universities to partner better with international educational organizations to say, there is a certain level at which we know people are likely to be more effective as international leaders. There's a profile of an international leader that is reliable. And then at least schools would know who they were hiring. And perhaps, sometimes an international school would do really well to hire a relatively novice director who's got, I often think of it like the Trivial Pursuit pie or cake. They've got most of the segments, but they need to develop some more of those segments. And they say, you know what? Our school is perfect for developing those segments, and we get the advantage of you being really strong in those segments where we're a bit weaker. And you would have a stronger sense maybe of within schools themselves of where their strengths lie at developing leaders, as well as what skills they need brought in. And that might mean that recruitment becomes slightly different as well. You're not looking for the perfect international head, because I don't believe there is one. I don't think there's a perfect principal. I don't think there's a perfect director. I think people are multifaceted, and that's the joy of it. But you need to know what you're looking for and then match it with what's on the market, as it were. So that's what I would like to see. And I'd love to have a role in framing it and shaping it. But I think there's so much good stuff out there. It's bringing it together in a coherent whole, but in a dispassionate way that's not mates teaching each other how to be leaders, which is a little bit what I would say it's framed as at the moment. But it's much more rigorous, hard work, and you can kind of prove your journey that you've done the brass tacks.
Yeah, and it'd be really interesting to think about what that process to bring that about could look like, and what that end result could look like. Because I'd agree with you that a lot of leadership feels like learning on the job or learning as you go, and navigating situations as they present themselves to you, and then it's getting on the phone to someone or shooting someone an email and say, hey, have you had to deal with something like this before, and trying to find your way through it. And you're interesting your comments about some of the differences, and people I've spoken to, and me myself, having worked in the public or government sector, and those structures and processes and expectations and frameworks are all there. And there is a very noticeable stark difference when you step into the international school section that you don't necessarily realize until you experience and reflect on that difference. So wondering, in that vein, what's one piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring school or education leader?
So I caveat this with the fact that I have never been a school leader, and I chose not to become a school leader. I saw what it did to my father, who was a head of department, a music head. Just, the nights of him in the sofa surrounded by lever arch files and admin and endless biros tucked in pockets and behind ears. And I thought, no, that's not something I would want to do. Hence the near misses with investment banks and the British Army. Nonetheless, I still love teaching. And I think it's a shame when, if you're a great teacher, finding ways to remain in the classroom and be a great teacher is, first of all, my first piece of guidance. Don't feel that you have to become an educational leader to be a success. I think my favourite people to work with in international schools are sometimes those teachers who are in their 50s, late 50s, early 60s, and they've still got a spark for finding new things that challenge them, that push them, that help them teach differently from the way they taught last year. So that's my first thing. Is I actually think the greatest challenge we have is retaining people with a spark in their eye in the profession. The spark is important. For people thinking about leadership, the first piece of advice would be why. Really understand the answer to that question. What do you hope to achieve by leading? What kind of goal do you have personally? That might be the easiest question, but what can you contribute that someone else would not be able to contribute to your school? And I think you've got to have a really clear idea of how you fit in. So it's not just, I want to be a leader. It's, I want to be a leader so that I can fit in with these ideas and these skills to this team. And that might mean that it also helps define which school you're going to be a leader in. Is it worth hanging around in your school for a while because that school's the perfect fit for you and the leadership skills you're going to contribute eventually once someone else decides to move on or a post opens up? rather than I'm going to move to this new school in a new continent to get a new job, and then discovering actually it's not the same. It's not what you expected because the culture, the context is different. So that would be my advice to someone thinking about it, which is on a personal level, be very sure about why you're doing it. And on a professional level, think about fit rather than job title, urgency, like I need this post now because I'm going to turn 30 and I need to become a leader before. That's all nonsense. If you're in the right place, you'll know it. And if that's the place for you to apply your skills, then it's worth having a conversation early so people know that you're interested and then stick around and lead in other ways that don't need the job title or paycheck to go with it.
It was really interesting hearing you talk about that. And I recalled, as you were mentioning that, I recall back in Australia, a school I was in as a deputy principal, and one of the math teachers in the department, 30 math teachers in the department, it's a very large school.
Wow.
And he was outstanding. Best teacher, one of the best teachers I've ever seen. He taught up to the highest level math. All he would just go in with a whiteboard marker tucked behind his ear into the class. It didn't matter which level of math or which kids it was, and he would just have them eating out of the palm of his hand, like just fantastic. We approached him one day and said, "Look, are you interested in becoming a head of department? There's a vacancy coming up." He said, "No, I'm good. I'm happy where I am. I'm doing what I need to be doing. I've no interest in all of those other things, and I'm perfectly happy in the classroom." And that's where he thought he felt he belonged and had his strength, and he was 100% right.
That's
And the
brilliant.
kids
And
were the
then
better for it.
you find there are opportunities as well for that kind of teacher to share what they're doing with the others. That's leadership as well. Just maybe not the job title and the paperwork that goes with it. All the fun parts, though.
Yeah. So a couple of quick questions to wrap things up. Your favorite book on leadership?
So I'd say anything by Dave Trott, who's not a leader. He's an advertising copywriter. But he communicates incredibly clearly. And I think the number one job for a leader is to communicate very clearly and simply. So read anything by Dave Trott. He was a copywriter. I thought he was so good that I assumed he was dead. When you read something, you think that's so good, that must be from another age, and then discovered he was alive and well in London on Twitter every day, and he writes a fantastic blog, so you can subscribe for free if you can't get hold of the books.
Good for David. That's good. All right.
So yeah, Dave Trott, Trott.
Amazing. I'll check him out. One thing you do daily that helps you lead better?
I have Mondays and Fridays no meetings days, which is very luxurious. But I'd say everyone needs to have time where it's blocked out for a meeting with yourself, and not when you're at your most tired, when you're at your freshest. So that would probably be the morning time. I think leaders tend to pack they pack their mornings full of meetings. It makes no sense because most people are freshest in the morning. So I also try to black out time every morning to write and communicate. It's really important it actually helps everything fall into place.
A leader, past or present, you admire?
I mentioned East Lothian Council, which is the local authority I taught in the most and went back to as the national advisor on learning and technology futures. My boss there, Don Ledingham, was by far the best boss that I've ever had, and therefore a leader I admire. He encouraged us to lead from the front while he led from behind, and he gave us lots of metaphors, analogies to try and understand how we were leading as young leaders. And his door was open for dialogue with pretty much anyone, including students from across. And he was the head of the local authority, to 45 schools. He would speak to young people on a weekly basis about their experience of school so that he could try and translate that into policy for the whole authority. And he now runs an amazing leadership consultancy working with businesses all around the world. And not so much in education, but still an outstanding leader and thinker on leadership, and a good LinkedIn follow if you're looking for more reading. So Don Ledingham.
Amazing. And finally, best advice you've ever received?
I got this from my colleague Kate Wadsworth, but it's from Mo Goddat, whose voice I love listening to in podcasts, whose books I enjoy reading, Solve for Happy. And it was a reminder just when I needed it of his advice. So the advice is when you're hit with stress and challenge and argumentation, people just not wanting to play nice. The first question is to ask. There's three questions to ask. The first question is it true? So when people say, or when you're the head, often it's not someone, it's the voice in your own head telling you that you're just not very good. So is it true? If it's not true, then you drop it. And then if it is true, then you say, well, can I do something about it? And if the answer is you can do something about it, then it kicks in your kind of action, taking action. And when you take action, it's a huge stress reliever too. So if you're faced with kind of internal woe or internal stress about something, is it true? And if it is true, then can you do something about it? And if you can't do anything about it, then you go for the nuclear option, which is number 3, which is simply asking, can I accept it? Kind of surrender myself to it and do something else, anything else that will make my life a little bit better today. And those 3 questions are incredibly useful if you ever have a 4 o'clock in the morning moment where you're stressing about something that happened the day before or something that you think is going to happen that day. And quite often, I think anxiety comes from worrying about what might happen in the future. And when you hit that first question, is that true? The answer is often, well, I don't know yet because we've not done it. And you can start to say, there's no point even thinking about that or worrying about that. So yeah, Mo Gaudat's books, podcasts, I think, like I said, talked about frameworks and advice. He's got it aplenty and it's all good stuff. And I think that for every leader, it could make your commute home a little bit easier and help you make sense of difficult days.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Ewan. It's been lovely chatting with you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the invite. And if anyone wants to follow up on the ideas, then I've given up on X or Twitter because of the cesspool it's become. But I am on Instagram, Ewan NoTosh, and LinkedIn is really where I write most often. So leave a comment, post your own responses when I say something you disagree with. But it'd be lovely to connect with some of the people who listen.
And we'll put all the links in the where this will be published as well. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, etc. Drop a comment below to let me know anything you'd like covered in upcoming episodes or suggestions for future guests. You can also connect with me on Instagram and LinkedIn.